I'm also the investor. I'm not just the athlete. I'm Charlie Stebbings, the investor, not just Charlie Stebbings who played professional cricket for 20 years. I think funds, investors, anyone coming in now with the backgrounds that big finance may have or whatever, they'll be looking much more at that. They'll be looking at how can we get more people, more fans engaging with us through their wallets. And there's no shame in saying it. You know, they really want to be doing this to try something new. And if you do it well, the economic levers that you can pull down the line are fantastic. You know, fingers crossed, you invest really well, you get fantastic returns. There's been examples of athletes doing that, you know, in many ways and shapes and forms.
Welcome to The Football Economy, the podcast where we explore the strategy, finance, and policy decisions shaping the future of global game. I'm your host, Ibrahim. Today's guest brings a rare perspective across sport, media, and investment. Charlie Stebbings is the host of Business of Sport, leads sports coverage at the influential venture capital firm 20 Feezy, and works closely with athletes and startups. He's interviewed the likes of Ivan Gazidis, former CEO of Arsenal, and Jamie Rubin, co-owner of Newcastle United, and regularly breaks down the business stories behind football's biggest moves. Charlie, welcome to Football Economy.
Thank you very much for having me. Delighted to be here.
Perfect. So if I'm not mistaken, you did launch the first episode of the Business of Sports, June 6th, 2023. So what could you tell me led you into this sort of venture, and what was the motivation for launching it?
I'm very impressed. I couldn't have told you that. I take your word for it. You know, when we set out to start this, the ambition was really to test a different type of conversation in sport. Sports media is incredibly saturated, as everyone knows. There's plenty of conversations that happen. There's lots of shows, there's lots of print media, but when you actually look at it, I think a huge amount of that is focused around the performance and commentary, and maybe increasingly over the last decade or so, the mentalities and kind of high performance cultures that drive a lot of that success. But one thing that we looked at that, you know, wasn't really as prevalent was the business behind sport. Now, this information is so important. It's on every newspaper, it's often on every online publication. It can get talked about and around quite a lot, but very rarely actually dived into. And even beyond that, one step further, very, very rarely do you get an opportunity to hear from the people actually impacting and affecting the industry at the top level. So that's the owners buying teams. That is the executives like Ivan Gazidis, who you referenced, having to run an organization. That is the athletes who now increasingly play a far more important role in the sports industry and beyond than just the performances that they will put across on the pitch or court or field. And so from our perspective, coming from a venture capital company and a background in a very successful venture capital show called 20 VC, which my brother and co-host on the show, Harry, set up 10 years ago, the aim was really to see if this type of conversation was something that people wanted to listen to within this space. Was it something that they would really get behind? And is an hour's worth or so of conversation around the business of sport enticing enough to get people excited about the things that we would run through with these guests? I'm delighted to say it is. We're 70 odd episodes in and have had some fantastic guests, but it really gives you a great chance to take a look under the hood of this industry and see some of the things that you don't get to see quite often.
Yeah, I mean, you did reference something that I find very interesting in the sense that we do come across different executives, different media players, and different business leaders in the football industry and also the sports industry. It comes across that there's this lack of transparency or a lack of need for communication, not just to the fans, but to the key broader stakeholders. My question to you now that you've, sort of like hinted at that, why do you think that drives this? And specifically in the sports industry, which is right in your face. So why do you think internally there's a lack of communication to the stakeholders, from the fans, to the investors, to the potential investors, to the community as a whole?
It's a great question. I'll answer it. I can answer it in two ways. I'll answer it from a personal perspective side. I'll also answer it from the kind of, I guess, passion of a fan who feels frustrated about this at the moment as well. I don't want to be overly critical, but I don't think it's unfair to say that our media environment is not conducive to allow people in sport to have the right types of conversations that they need to have. And I'll explain that by saying that quite often when people come in, when we have, if you have a conversation with a leading executive, if you have a conversation with a top athlete, an owner, generally, if it's been in a media environment that should we call as more traditional, the ambition behind that from the publication, the journalist, whoever that may be, is maybe not in the best interest of the people they're speaking to. It's often to get a headline and a story and, a clickbaity catchphrase or increasingly clip in this day and age that people are naturally going to buy into, follow through with, and then, kind of latch onto for a long period of time. I understand why. That's not a critique. Everyone wants to have cutting edge content that gets to the heart of things, but I don't think it always empowers really good conversations from these people, because they close up, they go into a shell. It makes doing any media more of a chore or a concerning activity rather than a really productive, proactive means of communicating with an audience. You can't escape it now, right? There's a thirst for information in life. All we want to do is access the things that we are passionate about, and that information, when you take that away or don't have that, means that people write their own narratives. So if I'm looking at this now from, as I said at the start of this answer, a more kind of passionate fan, I will use Chelsea, the club I support, as a real area of frustration on this. In my view, Chelsea's ownership is doing something, well, it's not my view, it's an objective fact. Chelsea's ownership is doing something very different to what we've seen in football before. They are running a club in a way that the Premier League hasn't seen, and the fans and all of the football industry are kind of looking at this and have been looking at it, trying to understand how this all fits together. Is it short term? Is it long term? Does this make sense to spread transfer fees over a long period of time? How can you sell your own assets to yourself and get away with it? Lots of these kind of questions. Now, if the Chelsea ownership, and just to add to that, those questions then often lead to a negative perspective. If the Chelsea ownership come out and have a conversation from the start and say, this is the value of us being able to do this. This is why we want to spread the costs of our contracts. It's a bold play, but guess what? There's risk in it as well as the reward. Yes, fine, we can spend money, but we're also taking on 8 years worth of risk on players that may have a really bad couple of years, and we've still got to pay them for 6 more. We can use our assets to build our balance sheet and spread our costs, because this is what the industry allows us to do. We're not breaking any rules. We're just finding new ways to go through it. Now, if they came out and said that and talked the fan base through the journey, there's a lot of people within that fan base that may be a little bit more willing to give that ownership group a lot longer, should we say, a bit more leeway to run that club in the way they see fit. Chelsea is a club that is used to short-term success. It's used to very quick success. This is a complete change in that. Communication should sit at the heart of creating an environment of positivity around this, and the ownership should leverage that. The fact they don't means people write their own narrative. That narrative is negative because it doesn't lead to, or hasn't led to, should we say, the immediate results that are normally associated with Chelsea. So in my view, it's a very good and current example of a team not leveraging the thirst for communication that I think fans really want. But I must say I understand why. And so I always say to us, for anyone coming on our show, there are a number of things that give securities around it and just how we record the show. We do pre-record it. We do allow people to kind of engage with the content. We want to create that environment of safety here, because if they do and they feel confident and comfortable sitting in this chair in this room, then we're going to get a much better chat out of them. And that ultimately is what you want, Ibrahim, is when, if you're going into these chats with people, you just want them to feel like they're secure in talking to you, because when they do, they're excellent. But they just very rarely get, I think, those opportunities to do it in the way that they would want to.
Yeah, this is a fair commentary on the state of communication and media when it comes to the football industry, and I really do agree with you. So if I was to ask you currently right now, what your sort of like opinion is on, the conversations you had different conversations speaking to football executives and investors in football and sports industry, but also adjacent sports that football could benefit from cricket to the NBA. What would you say has really informed your understanding of the sports industry, but specifically talking about the football industry?
That's a big question. I think if you're looking, the thing this does really well in being able to sit down with a lot of these people is you start to see themes.
Yeah.
So you start to recognize a few things that come up regularly in conversation that are challenges or opportunities or great ways to make money or ways that things are not working that need to be working better. Now we focus on the business side in the shows we do and how we work. So, quite often that is around how clubs are, if we're using just football, how clubs are losing money, why they're losing money. Let's use the Premier League as an example. And, again, completely my opinion and maybe fair, maybe unfair. If we're looking at the finances of Premier League clubs, I would say that I think the clubs over the last 20 years have got, should we say, a little bit drunk on some of the media money that they receive. And that media money is guaranteed every single year. It's written into their accounts and they know it's coming. Every time that Sky deal's re-signed, it's a significant amount of money. It's more money than, the team that finishes last in the Premier League gets more money than Bayern Munich or a rare other winner of the Bundesliga gets when they win. Now, that's fantastic in lots of ways. But it's a problem in lots of ways, because if you're never forced to innovate, to change, to look at yourself and see how do I need to get better to create more revenue, to drive better business, then I'm not going to maybe take some of the risks. I'm not going to look at the new ways in which I could improve our product, improve how we operate, because I've got the security, the financial security that is required to operate this tier one asset pretty well. Now put that on Bayern Munich or, another team, again, as I said, should we say any team actually in the Bundesliga using that example. They're still competing on a European level with a lot of these teams. They're still competing at a top level of football. They need to find a different way to build better businesses because they can't rely on those revenue streams that are centralized and distributed from a governing body. They have to be independent or more independent in their thought. They have to adopt new technologies. They have to look at how to engage their fans for longer on a match day. And give something more to commercial partners, whatever it may be. And so, I think from our side, that the general commercial side of football, and speaking UK centric, but, again, if we we're just looking at how some of the Premier League side is going, that is an area that I would love to see develop a little bit more, or at least to remove that feeling, rightly or wrongly, that we're just safe every year. We get good cash. We're going to be able to do the things we need to do. And also remember, it's a very rare environment, football, where what we need to do is manage how much you lose in the majority of cases. And that's another key theme we can dive into. But, if you're looking at, one ways you understand and see what's coming around in this industry and how it relates, it's incredible that sustainability, someone referenced it on one of our shows recently, sustainability is talked of in how little money you've lost, but you're still losing millions. So, generally in football, if you're losing 1.5 to 2 million a year, that's incredible. How are you managing to do that? Yeah. We're losing 10. That is madness. And that leads to a lot of the conversation that develops now around being a sustainable club outside of owner financing. Because the reliance on owner financing, and you can say this for any sport, the reliance on any, rugby in particular, I'm not sure if how much you've gone into in any conversations previously or where this is, but rugby financially, if you look at the top clubs, they are propped up, as football clubs are, by the bank accounts of their owners. Now, you take those owners out of it and the clubs don't exist or find it very hard to exist unless you find someone willing to take on that cost. In any sport, Ibrahim, that is a massive concern.
Yeah.
You have to find a way to support yourself so that if the owner financing is removed, you still have an asset. That is probably the biggest concern I would have and maybe the biggest theme that runs through all of the conversations we have, particularly with football league clubs, that continues to rear its head. It's how do we create enough business to ensure we're not reliant on an individual to pay us and our staff salaries to give our fans the experiences on a Saturday. And it's a concern.
Yeah. Just to reinforce your point, this is where maybe potentially what Chelsea is doing in terms of disrupting the status quo in terms of how commercial activities are done in the Premier League should be a welcome sort of like activity from all the stakeholders, all the teams in the league, but not just the Premier League, but also the Championship. Because there needs to be a rewiring of the thinking that it has to go into how we look at where do we find another or new avenues for commercializing our operations or our activities, how can we grow our fan bases. At the moment, it seems like it's more driven by socialist thinking, which is so funny and ironic because it's It's sort of like the opposite of the American status quo, although the American model, business model, in terms of the MLS, was created based off sort of like you could say a socialist model, where the UK is more focused on a capitalistic model in terms of the sort of like the model of the league when it was set up. But in terms of commercialization, they're both on the opposite end. So it's quite an interesting sort of like different divergence of
It's a great point. Someone, again, people have
Yeah.
talked about that a few times. It's funny. It's funny that, the most capitalist environment, i.e. America, has some of the most socialist systems in their sports, and it works.
Yeah.
And it gives the security, and they are continually innovating and creating value and extract. Do you know, one of the biggest things that comes up regularly that's a huge concern over here that is not over in America is how they talk about their fans. Over here, there is a fear of calling a fan a customer. And again, I understand it, but looking at how you look at fans that will influence how you can generate some of the revenue within your club, how you can extract a little bit more money out of the core fan base. And again, people saying extract money, that's a horrible saying. Again, fine, terminology, change it. But you have to think in a way where you have an amazingly passionate customer base who's here because they love this and they want to be here. If you offer them things that they want to spend on, then they will, and that's great. We need people who are change agents in sport. We don't need stewards. So innovators, not stewards. And again, I think we have too many stewards in football and beyond. No one ever gets fired for signing IBM. The famous saying of buying IBM. Now, that is a very problematic mindset to have if you apply it to football, because it will just mean that nothing ever really develops. Sometimes you do have to change it. Sometimes you do need to take a risk. And the worst thing is maybe it won't happen on your watch. Maybe the work you're putting in now may be something that gets realized and benefited from in 10 years' time. But you have to be willing to take that move, because if it's really for the greater good of the club or the asset or the rights holder you're working for, that's still part of your job as the person in charge of that organization.
Completely agree with you. So, we've spoken a lot about this sort of theme in terms of communication and media involvement, but let's transition to the sort of like athletes as investors. What I mean by this is basically we can see a growing trend when it comes to athletes, venturing into investments and venture capital or early stage investing. It's been going on for maybe the last 3 to 4 years. It's even more prominent now. What do you think has driven this sort of athlete investor, mindset? And is it, we can say, okay, this cheap money coming from the US, influx of capital from the US, but also the Premier League has benefited from broadcasting rights that have obviously increased in value. And this is what reinforced your point earlier about clubs not being driven internally. But my question to you again is, where do you think this is coming from in terms of the athletes' investments, force going forward?
I think there's a recognition in athletes that their careers are short. And I think there always has been. But now, in a current investment environment, in the era we live in where technology can influence everything, where the ease of getting involved in things has improved significantly, opportunities to do things beyond what they would have done previously have given rise to this appetite to get involved in a variety of different projects and initiatives. And investment is one of those things, which is brilliant to see, because you have an athlete, a top level athlete, who has got to where they are because they have an incredible dedication and skill set to achieve. Now, strip out what they've achieved in, that is applicable in some way, shape or form in another field. It doesn't necessarily have to be in sport. Mm. And if you're setting up a company, if you are creating a product, if you're providing a service, what an athlete will be able to bring to you if they're fully engaged in it will absolutely be able to help you on that journey. Now, the challenge is, how do you do it in the right way? And it's very different, I think, to make this point of difference, between the US and, should we say, Europe. The US is a system, if you look at it, it has education ingrained in sport. So even, the fact that the majority of professional sports people in the US go through a collegiate system, they go through a level of education beyond what a footballer would do maybe in the UK, where Wayne Rooney is 16 years old when he sticks the ball in the top corner for Everton against Arsenal, and that is the end of his education, pretty much, right? And it probably has been for maybe a year or so before that, because he's been so entrenched in getting in that Everton team. Now, you do not need to have any sort of educational credentials or kind of affirmation to get involved in sport here. It's because we just start early. The system picks up young people early and it puts them in as very important assets. In the US, it's different. And therefore, in the US, you have a structure which allows athletes to do a lot more, I'd say, alongside it, because they are far more aware and educated to the opportunities around them. If you're looking at over here, a lot of the conversations we have, so we, just for context, we bring athletes and have started to increasingly, particularly since Business of Sport has kicked off, we brought athletes into deals that we do as a fund to complement the work that we're able to do ourselves, to bring different access to the founders, to unlock a different geography. And quite often these deals have nothing to do with sport. And that's a really important point, because any athlete can apply themselves, to a sports deal in some way, shape or form. But how do you do something outside of it in a way you would never expect? That's the challenge. And also, how do you get the athlete engaged enough to know that they want to do it? Because if you don't have an engaged athlete, there's no point in really doing it at this level. I think that's key. You have to buy into how you can help a business and why you're doing it. And I think a lot of them now, they recognize, as I said, that their careers are short. They recognize that there's a different way that they can make money. And I think it's also, there's a big time element here. Athletes and footballers, if we're just talking about, that specifically, footballers do have a lot of time. They train hard, but there is time in their day that they can apply themselves to other things. Being able to invest in companies, work with companies, do something different. It's a fantastic way to be able to get a different type of education, to get a different type of exposure, to build different relationships. And that's where I've seen a huge amount of appetite from our side. They really want to be doing this, to try something new. And if you do it well, the economic levers that you can pull down the line are fantastic. Fingers crossed, you invest really well, you get fantastic returns. There's been examples of athletes doing that, in many ways and shapes and forms. So, the key is, Ibrahim, I think if there's one thing an athlete shouldn't be afraid to do, it's to recognize that their value when they probably first start investing is their brand. And we have quite a few conversations where an athlete may go, but I don't really want to be here just because I'm a name, because I'm probably a really valuable marketing tool or whatever it may be. And I understand it, because that's how they, are probably dealt with continually, and there may be more than that. But unfortunately, when you get into something new, you have to play to your strengths. And an athlete who is coming into investing for the first time, your value will be your face, your brand, what you've been able to achieve in sport. Own it, be passionate about it. Deliver that experience to a founder, to a business. And if it goes well, then you start getting known as, I'm also the investor. I'm not just the athlete. I'm Charlie Stebbings, the investor, not just Charlie Stebbings who played professional cricket for 20 years. And that evolution will come with time. But don't be afraid at the early stage to leverage the thing that you've got that other people don't. And now in sport, that is incredible profile. It's amazing audience. It's a fantastic track record of application and dedication to something, which every founder can learn from.
Yeah, it's a good point you make in terms of athletes leveraging their brand potential, but also making sure that they come into investing in a humble manner, which is, I guess, what you should expect going into a new venture or a new industry. Humility is key. But my question to you now is, you are part of 20VC, like I said in the introduction. 20VC is well known for investing in SaaS, fintech, AI. From your perspective, what would you say is the investment thesis for working with athletes?
So again, I think as I referenced, you want them to be able to, as long as they can contribute to a company in some way, then that's going to be valuable. Yeah. Now that can be unlocking a market. We have done deals where an athlete is incredibly big and their personality and character and all of that is, hugely appealing to a particular market, that a product, let's say a SaaS product or, whatever it may be, is about to launch or has a huge number of clients or whatever that may be. Now, again, it's probably going to be their brand. They're having to leverage to do this. But if you have that power to unlock a market and a geography and a new area for a company to break into, fantastic. That's a really great start. That's of value. Us as a fund, having the relationships with athletes that want to do this, an athlete is seeing a deal that they would never have seen before, because they're unlikely to know that this back-end platform, in whatever industry, is looking for this type of influence. That's not going to come across their desk. So working with us is a great chance to be able to get access to some of these deals. And us being able to work with them is a great way to offer the companies that we're investing in an additional area of support, which is what really investing at the level we do is all about. It's how much can we support these businesses once we've invested. It's not a put your money in and don't do anything. And that I guess is an easy way to answer that question. What we have to do there aligns very closely with what an athlete wants to do, which is not just be a passive investor. An athlete can easily put their money in a fund and let someone else invest it for them. So that's not what we do here. We will bring athletes into deals where they have the decision, the control of if it's something they want to do or not, and they will get an allocation in that deal that allows them to participate as an investor, and then also operationally if they're keen to help support that business on its journey and develop. But the power of control and decision making lies with the athlete. It doesn't lie with us having their money held for 7 to 10 years.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's fair. It's a fair point you're making. So my question now is around, so we know there's Zlatan Ibrahimovic, David Beckham are well-known figures in terms of esports, in terms of investing in esports. What do you think is the long-term potential or long-term play for esports when it comes to like the intersection of esports with traditional sports, say, for instance, football in that case?
It's a broader digitalization piece, isn't it? It's a different way of engaging. I mean, I've had lots to do with that industry for a while as well. Yeah. The biggest problem with esports is actually very similar to some of the biggest problems with mainstream sports. Making money is hard. They're costly operations to run. Esports as well, you've seen a number of leagues established and created, which have a fantastic thesis at the beginning and make a huge amount of sense. Hey, let's franchise something and set up a team in a load of cities where we know gamers are and we know there's major sports assets we can leverage, et cetera, et cetera. But guess what you got to do alongside that? You've got to have your production. You've got to have the team in place to actually deliver on these events. You've got to have stadia or a venue, unless it's all centralized in a league, who obviously put that on, which we've started to see more. There are so many challenges to doing this. Now, is it a great thing to be able to leverage? Yes, because what's it do? It engages a group of people who traditional sport in a popular topic of conversation find it harder to interact with. Now, I don't 100% buy into that. I'm not someone that sits and goes, I think younger generation doesn't buy sport. I just think there's a different consumption habit of a younger individual to how they engage with sport. So we just need, again, to be more creative in how we attract that individual, that new generation to come and watch our traditional products. Esports is a way to do that. You've seen a few do it quite interestingly. I remember Schalke were one of the first football teams to get involved in it properly. It was a serious investment to buy into a European franchise esports league. It was about 8 to 10 million. I can't remember, you'll have to check this, but I seem to remember the fan base found out or something that was invested. It was at a time where Schalke was struggling. That's a significant amount of money that probably could have gone on somewhere else in the club. And as most football fans want, generally that money spent on performance, but it went into something different. And I think a few years later, again, you'll need to check, but I think a few years later, they sold it for at least 3 times that slot. So, if you're looking at that as an appreciating asset and a different way to make money, well, that put maybe 14 or so million in the budget that they didn't have before, looking at a different way to engage. It comes back to your point about how do football clubs make money or how do we be more creative? But look, if we're really looking at the opportunity, it's how do you incorporate different entertainment products to be able to help each other? And all of the, again, traditional things, just like athletes investing, what they can bring businesses. What can an esports organization bring a traditional sports entity? What can a traditional sports entity bring an esports organization? And for the esports side into traditional sport, it'll be, as I said, access to the fantastically engaged, passionate audience that it has. And from a esports organization, what can they get from a club? Generally, a very good structure of operations, generally. They're probably a pretty good commercial model that you can learn off. Probably a good understanding of content distribution and rights, more traditional way, not the decentralized kind of more fragmented media environments that some of the esports organizations may work in. So, there's lots of those best practices that can be shared across industries. But it's a great question to look at in this context because it feeds in perfectly to what you asked at the beginning, which is around the business models of clubs and the critique I was leveling, saying, be more ambitious, be more creative. An esports business, an emerging market, is exactly the type of thing that could work, could not, But do you try it? Should you try it? Yeah, probably. You should at least have a look at it, and you should at least be recognizing the value that these industries can bring to each other.
So you've just said something key there. You said be more ambitious, be more creative. So we've seen the rise of private equity in the last few years, specifically when it comes to the multi-club ownership model, which is spreading fast. From an investment perspective, is it a smart strategy long term? Is it a potential governance nightmare? What's your take on this?
I think yes, I think it is a smart move. And just from a financing perspective, you've got lots of assets that ultimately sit in one of the most popular entertainment products in the world, with really engaged audiences and quite often under monetized. So can you do something with that? Yes. Is it a governance nightmare? I think so. You ask any competition now that is really trying to regulate the integrity of their sport. If you have two teams, if you have Red Bull Salzburg and Red Bull Leipzig, in the same group, is that a problem? Yeah, probably. Is it a problem always? Maybe not. But you have integrity of sport that sits at the heart of everything, right? That has to, for sport to have any validity, and it doesn't matter what sport it is, the integrity of that has to be strong. So I think multi-club can cause a problem on that front. But look, in sport right now, you have massively inflating valuations. You have asset prices that are going through the roof. And what that does is it reduces the number of buyers that you can actually legitimately have for some of these institutions. And we had one of our early guests, we had Steve Pagliuca, who owns the Boston Celtics, Atalanta in Italy. And he got down to, I think it was the final three or at least the final group of bidders for Chelsea. And we asked, what that process looked like. He said, I needed to go in and I literally needed to have, I think, 2.5 billion in cash or liquid to be able to prove we had the funds to complete a transaction or the initial phase of a transaction. Now, you can see paper worth, you can see net worth, all of this. 2.5 billion in an account or available is a lot of money, and not that many people have it. So what that's done is it's seen a rise of consortiums, so groups of people coming together to buy things together. It's seen a rise of private equity, big funds able to deploy and continue to inject. Remember, that's the key. And this is where private equity, I think, may have had some early surprises. It's not just the buying price, it's what it costs to run a club. So you're looking at what the next 10 years of investment is going to look like continually, and that needs to be drawn down. That needs to come from the fund as well. So there's a huge amount in there that you need to be prepared for. Where it's interesting is what the motivations of private equity are. Ultimately, they're returning funds. They're under a pressure to return a fund. That means there's an exit probably at some stage. There needs to be an out. So this isn't a passionate, not isn't, but it may not always be a passionate, I'm going to hold this as a core asset close to my heart and build a relationship over 30 years with the fans. It's still a business deal. And what I think is interesting about sport, and it maybe shifts how we look at it, and football in particular, because this is where we see huge increases at the moment, is you're only ever really recognizing any form of good financial return at exit. You're going to lose money throughout. You're probably going to find it very hard to break even if you're at the top level and spending to try and keep up with the market. But when does that time happen where you make money? When you sell it. Man United is a good example. Whatever the valuation was exactly, it was about 7 to 8 billion when Jim Ratcliffe bought into it, and the Glazers bought it for less than a tenth of that. Now they've probably put in, even if let's say they put in 2.5 billion. And let's say maybe they've lost 1 billion, right? Whatever this is, that's completely random, by the way, just speculating. But if you're selling at a valuation of over 10x what you bought it for, that return then to them is worth it. That's a good business deal, but it's over a life cycle. It's not an immediate point. And so funds they're going to be looking at this. Why did Clearlake and buy Chelsea? Why did Redbird do what they do? In places like AC Milan, why did these funds look at it? They probably look at it and they go, we think they are undervalued currently because they're not making enough money. If we can get that valuation up, if we can get them generating more, if you can turn Chelsea into a 500 million turnover business to a 1 to 1.5 billion, then the valuation of this should theoretically improve significantly. So therefore, we're getting our 3x or whatever it may be on our investment. I think where you've got challenges sometimes is a fund invests in it'll probably invest in multiple assets, and you want to make sure your asset is at the heart of that fund. You want to make sure that it's a top priority, because if another asset starts doing really well and succeeding, and this has been a concern in things like rugby, if that sits in the same fund as maybe an investment in Formula One, an investment in Premiership rugby, it's it's very hard for them to focus their attentions exclusively on the rugby deal because there's a huge amount that's going to that Formula One, and that's returning their fund. So that's where they're going to put a lot of their time and attention. So any multi-club investment, any multi-investment from private equity funds, I think you just really want to be sure that the intentions of those funds align with the assets that you're buying, because you know what it's like. Fan bases, communities, these are businesses unlike any other businesses. You're accountable to hundreds of thousands of people in ways you're not when you invest in a tech company. And that, whether it's important or not to you, will be a real headache for you if you don't recognize that. But I think it's great, because I think more money into sport is fantastic, more appetite to get involved. You see people coming from outside of sport investing in, and ultimately the system improves if we can get more money into it. We just want to make sure that the structures and the motivations for doing it support the initial intentions of the investors.
Yeah, so I mean, just to transition towards something similar in the sense of content and branding, which is potentially going to change going forward when we see private equity being a main stakeholder or mainstay in the football industry. Where do you think they could potentially, capitalize on their understanding and their best practices in the US in terms of being able to help these clubs leverage the digital space and create like a new frontier in terms of commercial modeling for increasing their ability to actually generate revenue and become at least solvent?
Well, I mean, traditional investors, if you're coming from a private equity type environment, or let's just call them traditional investors, if they're investing out of funds and they're investing big tickets, let's be generic, but let's say they've probably got very good experience across product and tech. Let's just use that as an example. Now, in this day and age, you're probably going to improve your business if you leverage the products and technology available to engage your fans better, again, as I said, to create your own content and distribute it effectively, to increase your ownership of your licensing and IP and what that actually means for the brand as a whole, and how you can then monetize that. Can you, the fan experiences, everyone, it's kind of a horrible fan engagement, fan experiences, all of this, you see it all the time. But if you can create more opportunities to engage with your audience, and that's not just your match going audience, because that's always going to be a small portion. These clubs, and I hate this, it's one of my least favorite things, is when a club goes, we have 500 million fans or we have 1 billion fans. It's like, well, what does it mean, right? What is a fan? How are you quantifying that? Is that a unique view on a video, or is that a follower on socials, or like how many are actually spending any money with you? Even if it's 50p on something, how many are actually directly engaging? How are they engaging? And what do they want from you when they make that kind of connection? And I think funds, investors, anyone coming in now with the backgrounds that big finance may have or whatever, they'll be looking much more at that. They'll be looking at how can we get more people, more fans engaging with us through their wallets. And there's no shame in saying it. You want people, just like you want anyone who, you've got a product, you want to sell it. But the hope is that you're getting something as a fan back from it. You're not just giving money because you're feeling generous or you feel like you're being exploited. You're giving money because you're getting something good back. And if football clubs, the top football clubs, can leverage their brand and their connections with their communities better to generate more money, to create better experiences, and that experience doesn't need to be exclusive to a stadium. It could be an exclusive it could be an online experience. It could be an opportunity to have a digital engagement conversation with player or whatever that may be. If you can do that better, then there's a high chance that with a better fan base development and kind of engagement strategy comes better business. And with better business comes better appetite for the big finances to go, right, okay, this is an area we want to continue to put our money in. What you don't want to see is a continuation of the same.
Right.
We're 70 to 80% reliant on a centralized media deal that could fall over at any moment. And then what do we do? Because we've been sitting on this cash for a long time and haven't really looked at how to develop.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, I have this example when it comes to Real Madrid, which is a community-owned club. You could say potentially a lot of the German clubs are community-owned because of the 40-41 rule. But we look at England, where we have like an influx of private equity firms owning clubs. We have state-backed entities owning clubs. But we don't see that exponential commercialization of the club when it comes to understanding their database, their actual fan engagement, the actual impact on wallets or impact on sort of like buying behavior. But we do see that when it comes to Real Madrid. Like I recently read a book called The Real Madrid Way, and you can see, this is an old book by the way, but you can see that Real Madrid have like a very good understanding on how to actually capitalize on technology, social behavior, and the appeal of their fan base and the appeal of their branding to the wider global fan base or potential fan base that they do have. In your opinion, being a Brit, what do you think is the key lessons or key insights that the English Premier League could learn from a community-owned club like Real Madrid in that sense?
Do you know what? It's tough. Real Madrid made a big deal about being the first club to turnover I think it was $1 billion, right? So they made more than $1 billion. And now, fantastic, brilliant. And they've done a fantastic job. They are a massive, massive global brand. Again, you referenced him earlier, so I can use something from our chat that I found very interesting. Ivan Gazidis compared Manchester United, and you could put Real Madrid in the same thing. He used Manchester United, but it's the same point. You know, if you're looking at a global brand, they're not far off Coca-Cola in recognition in the countries they're probably recognized in and how people have engaged with it. If you look at revenue, it's like a 1.2%. Now, yes, you've got one product that can go on every shelf and you've got another that's a brand requiring a different level of engagement. I'm celebrating a brand and an asset as major as Real Madrid to break through a 1 billion mark. I'm still looking at that going, you guys, now you're the best of a group of clubs and teams that aren't doing that well. Like, well done. But what about now comparing yourself to the next level? What about the real potential that you have? Because an NFL team, Cowboys or whatever it is, I'm pretty sure the Cowboys, you know, they're doing 1.5 billion. Well, you know, their market, I'm going to say globally, from a pure play recognition, and if we're talking like fans perspective, is not going to be as big as Real Madrid's. Yeah, they're making more money. So I'm kind of answering your question. I'll get on. But the first point I have, I think, is that celebrate your successes. But even Real Madrid, you know, breaking through that, even doing some of the things they're doing, it can keep going, keep getting better because you can do a lot more. Now, bring it back to what is being done and how they've done it. Look, absolutely, they've done a fantastic job. They are doing a brilliant job. They continue to. They are such an incredible brand. Success drives it. They've got incredible talent that they can leverage. And they've got a history. And fans, people, however, again, we're classifying fans, they buy into this. They want to engage with it. And instead of Real Madrid getting lazy on that, saying we've got lots of fans, what they do is they create opportunities to engage. And so, you know, I'm not sure. I'd be interested to know on your side, you know, what do you think that's driven by the structure of their ownership? You know, you mentioned a community kind of focused and should we say not an independently owned club to a Manchester United, let's say, of a similar level, but with a very different ownership structure. Do you connect the two as being a major reason for why Real Madrid may be particularly good at that and why Manchester United not?
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, so from what I've seen, from what I've understood, Real Madrid is more focused on making sure that there's a long-term play in place, regardless of who is, you know, the president or who is managing the affairs of the club or setting the strategy. They have key stakeholders. I'll give you an example. They have, so for instance, I think the CFO, I might be wrong, but this is a recent insight of mine. The CFO was not a football fan. In fact, he was deliberately recruited by Florentino Perez because he didn't understand or didn't follow football, meaning that he was separated from actually the football fandom and the emotional impact of being a football operator in a football environment. That's one aspect of it. But you could also say potentially Real Madrid has a long history that doesn't actually have a rival in football itself. You know, the number of times they won the Champions League, it's unheard of. But I think the main thing is that they have like key experts in different fields, from marketing to operations to finance, who are basically the best of the best in their play. I mean, they rival anyone in any industry. So you have them actually operating at a very high level compared to, for instance, Manchester United, who are actually at the behest of a family who basically say, okay, you know what, we're going to have an accountant as the head of this club because he's going to look at our best interests, meaning that he can commercialize a club so we can get our dividends, versus Real Madrid, who are community owned in the sense that they're thinking, how can we make sure the next set of Real Madrid fans who are 14, 15, 12, 13 can benefit from seeing the club become even bigger in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. So I think that's a key difference. There's a long-term plan. Yeah.
That's a better answer than I get. I completely agree with you. I think that's a fantastic kind of link between ownership and long-term revenue, or should we say business, broader business opportunity. But I think then that you get this rise to the new type of owner as well now, which is your Wrexham. Let just reference that. If you can combine those two things you actually separated and laid out, you still want to drive great business, but you are firmly integrated in the fan base and the success. If you can bring those two together and create an environment where you're generating loads of money and engaging with an incredible community and building your fan base globally, that's the dream. That's why these guys are referenced all the time. And everyone may go, oh God, not again. But it is because what they've done is so creative and different. Again, we keep, I feel a bit of a theme here. You do things differently, and you give yourself an opportunity to see different results. It's not rocket science. But, it's not just leveraging Ryan Reynolds. It's how they've done partnerships. Now, yes, fine, it helps that you can get United Airlines and, Vistaprint and, TikTok and whatever it may be. And that's going to be the bigger brands coming because of the appeal of probably the ownership. But what they also do is that could have been a local dealership for cars or a boiler company or whatever, the types of businesses you see often lower down the league. How they announce the partnerships, the content they create around it, all of this is so different to what we've seen before. Now, that is a different way to engage its fan base. People then, it's social everywhere. It hits kind of different channels. People are looking at it and seeing this who may not have a clue what Wrexham is or what football even is, but they find it quite engaging because it's a funny way to talk about a brand. Then you get a bit of interest that peaks. Okay, how do you take advantage of that? They seem to be the masters of really kind of engaging people, both in and out of their immediate community, and growing that attention on their brand, unlocking all of that potential, not just of the club, but of the broader appetite for football and sport. And they leverage celebrity, they leverage, their original audience to be able to do that. That's, kind of a bridging of those two things that you've seen and that you were describing as separating that kind of fan club owned environment and independent owned. How do you bring someone in who can really do both really well? And, we live now in a time, as we've said, where technology and media drives pretty much everything. So anyone that's got a camera phone can pretty much come up with a strategy. Now, it may be very unprofessional and clunky and whatever, but does it matter? No. If you can do something different, if you can create something that you think people may want to see, that's brilliant. Welcome to Wrexham has episodes in there which don't even feature football. Yeah, there's not a football pitch in sight in a few of them. It's about what happens around it. And that's how things started to change. Just looking at what else there is to be able to, again, leverage to create value. But that's what you want. You want owners in here. You want people running these clubs who, I completely agree, have the long-term future of the asset at centered to their priority, which is why I said, when you look at private equity and stuff, it's great. You want that money to come in, but the intentions have to be there.
Yeah.
Fit and proper tests in the EFL have to be there. But, by the sounds of it, from our conversations, they could probably be better at doing the job they're set up to do. But the point of these is to make sure that you can protect the asset, because these are unique propositions to communities.
Yeah, you made a very key point there, leverage to create value. I think that says it all. So my question to you now is, I should say this I've obviously done some research before this episode, and it's clear to me that you're a big sports fan. So that comes out very well in this episode also, from rugby to football to Indian Premier League. So my question is actually the IPL. I'm not sure if you've listened to the recent episode of Acquired, when they basically the almost 5-hour episode on Indian Premier League. I also haven't finished it, but my question is basically around that. Where do you think football is going when you see the increased valuation of the Indian Premier League? Like, where do you think football has it wrong in terms of actually trying to penetrate markets like Asia, India, potentially Pakistan also from a football perspective? Because I see it as a big threat to football's ability to increase its commercial viability going forward, when you see that the Indian population obviously is massive and they're very focused on cricket as a sport. It's basically a national sport, as you well know more than I do. There are football fans there, but it's a big threat to football and obviously NFL and other sports around the world. What's your opinion on this?
I mean, look, what you're talking about is something we talk about regularly on the show, which is the attention economy, right? And this thing that, basically is now there's so much that can capture our attention as a consumer. We joke and we say, our competitor on the show is as much Taylor Swift as it is the rest is football. Because when you go on to Spotify or Apple Music or whatever it could be, you can choose to listen to your favorite artist alongside instead of listening to your favorite podcast or whatever it may be. So, our attention wallet, if you want, can only stretch so far. Sport has, in itself, let's just take music and movies and everything else out of it. Yeah, obviously there's a huge amount of competition for it. Look, IPL is incredible. Right, it's the most successful story of a new league being formed, created and sustained at the highest level, driving value. The revenues of those teams over a short period of time when they're actually playing, 7 to 8 weeks, is more than the majority, more than, I'd say at least a quarter of Premier League teams would generate if they didn't have media. And that's in 8 weeks, and those Premier League teams play for 38 games. So, they're leveraging commercially a fantastic asset and audience and community. Their valuations are in the billions. I mean, incredible. That's driven by scarcity. As with everything we see in franchise leagues, you want to buy into them because the opportunities to do so when they're really great don't come up very often. Does football look at the IPL as a concern? I wouldn't say so. I think it's probably, there'll be similarities in audience, but there are still differences. I also don't think you are, I'm a massive cricket fan and a fan of IPL as well. And I'm a massive football fan. I don't ever feel like I'm watching, unless maybe there was a Saturday afternoon or evening, I don't feel like I'm having to choose one or the other. But I am having to choose, increasingly between, let's say, this weekend, if you've got, a big Premier League game on Sunday at 4 p.m. and you've got the Miami Grand Prix on at a similar time, you're having to make a decision there. If you've got, it could be an IPL game at exactly that same time, just happens to be placed along those. You do have increased competition for this. But, IPL is financially incredibly powerful. As an investment, and you're buying in right now, I'd like to know why you're buying into it, because the prices are so high. Your return, let's say you're buying in at 1.2 billion, right? And if you're buying in at that level, you've got a lot of money. So, you're looking for something that you can make a bigger return on than traditional stocks, S&P, whatever that may be. So 2.5 to 2.8% or whatever it is. So if you want more than the 2.8, 2.8x, like if you're looking at some of that and you're going, right, okay, well, I'd need to sell that business as an IPL asset for like 3 billion. That's quite a big ask. Where are you? What are your motivations for it? Do you just want it as an investment because it's a great thing to have and it's a very secure way to keep your money and have a great time in it? Do you see massive growth potential even beyond this where we can develop it? Is there an exit in the horizon that appeals to you? New leagues are fantastic for sport. They create opportunity, but it's also a timing of when you get into them. Look at the franchise values. When do they make the most sense? When can you make the most money? If that's your objective, that's a key. And we see increasing amounts of emerging leagues at the moment. Football have looked at doing things, Kings League, Baller League, these organizations and tournaments that come up, shortening the game, changing the rules, bringing in a different type of performer, athlete, whatever it may be, to drive that value. But generally in sport, it's very hard to do it without some form of history, legacy, connection with a past, or that could be the athlete, it could be a brand, it could be an individual managing one of these teams that that people used to love. John Terry doing Baller League, for example. But it's hard work. People often just think now you create a new league and there's great success, and look at what the IPL's done. But that's your North Star. Football's got the biggest global fan base and will continue to do so. I think from my view, it just has to make sure that it keeps providing the quality of product on the pitch as well as everything else to deliver to a fan base and keep that attention. And hope that people's attention wallets, that's what we want to call them, has enough space for Premier League football or whatever it may be.
Right. So we're getting towards the ending of this episode, but I do have a question around sort of social responsibility. I mean, from what I've seen, it says that you're a trustee at MS UK, working on health and community initiatives. Would you like to explain to To the audience, like, why did you get into this? What's the driving factor? How does this basically shape your worldview in that sense?
I could say that kind of probably works in exactly the same way I've been talking about sport. Harry's and my mum was diagnosed with MS 15 or so years ago. Multiple sclerosis is MS. And so, look, like anyone who's experienced illness or, something similar in a family or someone close to them, quite often when that happens, you look for ways that you can get involved to help support that. A few years after mum was diagnosed, an opportunity came up with the charity we'd worked very closely with, which, MS UK is fantastic because it helps, it helps people who have the disease. Quite a lot of charities, and this is kind of across the board, a lot of money in charities and social side is spent on trying to prevent things or, cure them. So in research around how do we stop people getting MS, not necessarily how do we help people with MS, because those people live with it every single day and you have it for the rest of your life. So in a cancer term, it would be like Cancer UK, I think it's I've had a complete mind blank, and Macmillan, right? So Cancer Research and Macmillan. Cancer Research does obviously the research, Macmillan does the care around it. So, from our side, it was just really important to get involved in some way that would help people like mum, who, a cure would be fantastic, but they have the reality of everyday support that needs to be there. And when you get involved in something like this, I think you just have to look at, again, what you can bring that's slightly different. Charity boards, historically, and I've been involved for probably 6 or so years now. I would have been 25 or so when I got on it. So, and that's very different. But what did they need to do? They needed probably to look at things a little bit differently. They needed to improve how they were doing stuff on a digital front, because how they were speaking to their audience was maybe not as it should be. Were they utilizing all the opportunities at their disposal? There are just things that the traditional people that may have sat on charity boards previously didn't have exposure to that younger people did, and that opportunity now is there for a lot of people. I think where age isn't a restrictor on ability. You have a very, very unique set of skill sets if you're 25 and engaged and interested and applied, just as you do if you're 60 and have a wealth of experience behind you. It'll be different, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. And so, I'd encourage anyone that, and it's the same across anything. If there's something in there that, you're really passionate about or you think you can influence or support, then there will be a way to get involved in it. It's just finding out how to best do it. So that kind of social, responsibility piece in there is I think a really interesting one. And look, I really enjoy it. I think it's a really important thing to do. And, it's something that hopefully makes a difference to the people that we work with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an outsider speaking too, but from what I see, I would say it's inspiring to see basically what your mom is doing and also what you and your brother are doing. So, yeah, I would say that's inspiring. But so just to close off the episode, before that, I'd like to have like a quick rapid fire question round, and basically just give you a question and you can tell me what comes to mind first, if you don't mind. Cool. So in your opinion, what's the most underrated business operator right now in football?
Oh, good question. Most underrated business operator. Do you know what? I was really impressed. Really, I know I'll probably speak from the experiences I've had, because that's then I can say it justifiably. I was really impressed with Liam Scully. Liam Scully was the chief executive of Lincoln City, who we had on, so League One team. The work they were doing around what I've just talked about, doing things differently. They just hired an entrepreneur in residence. Now, that for people who won't appreciate what that is basically just another way to look at how you can get involved in businesses, leverage investments as a football club to bring those products probably to how you operate and to the fans. But you're actually, as a club, participating in the growth and development of those businesses. He's always seems to be, again, from the exposure I've had to him, he always seems to be thinking in a way that's going to really kind of push the boundaries of what that team is doing. I think there are some fantastic operators in the Football League. I think I'll be careful, and please, no disrespect, but you'll understand what I'm saying. Selling Manchester United, if it's a commercial deal, or right, there's a lot of people that want to buy that. There's a lot of people that want to be involved in it. Selling Lincoln or Cambridge or Plymouth or the Exeter, that's harder. So the people that are down there really doing this work on a daily basis, I think that's something to look at. And so some of the operators in the Football League, League One, League Two in particular, are really excellent. And it's a pleasure to chat with them about it.
Cool. And what do you think the opportunities are when it comes to sponsorship brokering in this championship from your perspective?
Look, sponsorship generally follows attention, right? So media deal in the championship is excellent. So $1 billion this right cycle. That's, a huge deal when you look at the struggles in Europe. So that takes it to more eyeballs. They've got more opportunity. They've got fantastic teams in there. You look at the quality of the teams in that league. It's a really, really strong league. So with that, with the elevation of those assets, with teams like Wrexham, right? You look at rising tide lifts all boats analogy that, you often hear. There's going to be more commercial interest in lower leagues because there is more exposure of the clubs to global audiences. So the challenge for them, I guess, is how do they break out of the more maybe localized commercial models where, as I referenced earlier, you may have a boiler company or a local taxi service or whatever it may be as your sponsor to then look at, okay, how do we work with sponsors or commercial partners that are maybe taking us to a new audience, that are going to give us value beyond what we can offer them. And that's where I think the next kind of interesting cycle will be, is do they leverage this new exposure that they have effectively or not?
And then the final question I would say is, where do you see business of sports in the next 10 years?
Having interviewed loads of really great people, including Roger Federer and Jose Mourinho and Tom Brady and Lewis Hamilton, whoever it may be. I mean, in all seriousness, I think it's a fantastic platform, right? We speak to amazing people, some of them big names, some of them people won't necessarily know about. And I enjoy the ones that people may not know about as much, sometimes more than the biggest names that we get on. What I want is, I want it to be a place where people trust that they can get a really, really great set of insights from name independent. So, if they're on the show, if they're talking to us about stuff, trust that there's a really good story to tell here. And I think it will continue to evolve in different ways. We will do more and more with the show. We will be engaging, these people and these conversations in different ways. We'll leverage it across investment even more. The opportunities to really build around media are huge. What media gives you is network and access, which is where it's always been valuable to us. You get great relationships through doing things like this. You will see that, doing this show. The key is, how do you build more than just a transactional, I'm going to interview you for an hour relationship, and try and find the different ways in which you can help support, create a relationship longer term with some of the people that you get to speak to. Because if you're doing it right, if we're doing it right in what we can offer, that should be at the heart of everything. So I want us to be, more than the show. I want us to be a place people trust. You can have these great conversations for a source of information, and obviously keep getting the best people to come in and talk to us and open and create that, as you said right at the start, lovely way to round it off, a place of trust and support where anyone who may not like to have these conversations will feel like they can, where they feel this is a space to come and chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Charlie. And this has been a very packed, insightful discussion, taking us through both media, sports, and investments in terms of the side of the game. So thank you for explaining that and giving us those insights.
I loved it. We could have talked for ages.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was Charlie Stebbings on the football economy. We explored the rise of the athlete investor, the media power of clubs, and the next phase of capital flow into football. Make sure to follow Charlie on X. We'll put the link down below. Check out the Business of Sport podcast. I mean, I check it out as often as I can, and learn about the great work MS UK is doing to support people with multiple sclerosis. Don't forget to subscribe. Join us next time, and see you next time. Thank you.